Rover was always meant to be the savior, and that's exactly where the problem starts. Because being a savior doesn't automatically make you a hero. From the very beginning, that's the role the story gives them. They arrive in this world, they carry a power no one fully understands, and every major conflict keeps pulling them towards the same outcome. Rover saves the day. And for a long time, that's exactly why something felt a bit off. But 3.3 does something more interesting than that. At this point, whether Rover was going to save Aemeath or not wasn't really the question anymore. We all kind of knew where that was going. The real question was what that outcome actually means. Because somewhere along the way, something changes. Rover stops feeling like just the savior the world needs and starts feeling like an actual hero. More than that, they start feeling like a person. And that difference matters. Because a savior is a role, but a hero is a choice. And Aemeath is the moment where that difference finally becomes clear. Not just because Rover tries to save her, but because everything around that moment forces us to see them differently. The failure, the guilt, the desperation, even the need for help, all of that does something power alone never could. It humanizes them, and by the end of it, the story flips the whole idea on its head. This isn't just about Rover saving someone, it's about the world saving its heroes. So today I want to talk about that moment, why it matters so much for Rover as a character, and how Aemeath might be the reason they finally become more than just Wuthering Waves' savior. If we're going to talk about this moment, we need to start with something a bit uncomfortable. Because for a long time, Rover just didn't really work as a character, and that's not even something unique to Wuthering Waves, it's a problem a lot of gacha games run into, especially when the protagonist is written as a self-insert. There's always this trade-off. You want the player to project onto them, but at the same time they still need to feel like an actual person inside the story, and most of the time that balance just doesn't land. Rover, especially early on, feels closer to a role than a character. They're the one who show up, the one who solves problems, the one the story revolves around, but not someone who actually feels shaped by any of it. And when that happens, something else starts to break. Because the protagonist is supposed to anchor the story, they're the one who defines the tone, the direction, the emotional weight behind everything. But if they don't feel like a real person, then the story itself starts to feel like it's moving forward because it has to, not because someone is actually pushing it there. And this is where the idea of a savior comes in. From the very beginning, that's how Rover is treated. They're powerful, they're important, and they're positioned as the solution to problems before those problems are even fully understood. But being a savior doesn't automatically make you a character, it just gives you a role to play. And for a long time, that's actually what Rover feels like. Not someone making choices, not someone struggling in a way that defines them, just someone moving from one situation to the next, doing what the story needs them to do. And the issue with that is pretty simple. If nothing about the protagonist feels personal, then nothing they do really carries weight. That's why the shift that starts in 3.1 matters so much. Because for the first time, Rover makes a choice that actually feels like it comes from them. Choosing to save Aemeath isn't just the story moving forward, it feels personal. And that might seem like a small change, but it's an important one. From that point on, Rover slowly starts to move away from just being a savior and closer to being an actual character. 3.3 doesn't introduce that change, it completes it. But that only works because something already started earlier. And to understand why that matters, we need to look at the difference between being a savior and actually becoming a hero. So if being a savior isn't enough, then what actually makes someone a hero? On the surface, not much really changes. Rover is still powerful, still the one people rely on, still the one expected to step in and fix things. In a lot of ways, they're still the savior. And that's exactly where the difference starts. Being a savior and being a hero aren't the same thing. A savior is a role. And in Rover's case, it's more than just something the story gives them. It's something imposed on them from the very beginning. They're sent into this world with a purpose. And that purpose is simple. To save it. Once you look at it like that, it changes how you read everything they do early on. At that point, it's hard to tell how much of it is actually their choice. Are they acting because they want to, or because that's simply what they were meant to do? And when a character is defined like that, something important gets lost. Agency. If your role is already decided, your actions don't really feel like decisions, they just feel like the story moving forward on its own. That's why, even though Rover was always capable, something about them still felt distant. The issue was never power, it was intention. A hero is different. A hero is a choice. It's not about whether you can save someone, it's about choosing to act, even when it's not required, even when it's not expected, even when it might not work. And that's where 3.1 starts to shift things. Choosing to save Aemeath doesn't feel like something Rover is supposed to do, it feels like something they want to do. That difference matters because this is where everything begins to change. This is where Rover stops doing what they're meant to do and starts doing something they might regret. In that moment, they stop being someone fulfilling a role they were given and start becoming someone acting out of their own will. That's where the human side begins to show. That's where they start to feel less like a savior and more like a person. But making that choice is only the beginning, because choosing to act is one thing, living with the consequences of that choice, that's where everything in 3.3 really starts to matter. At this point, there's one concept in storytelling that fits here almost perfectly. It's called save the cat moment. The idea is simple. You show your protagonist doing something selfless, something that immediately tells you who they are as a person. It doesn't need to be big. Most of the time, it isn't. It just needs to feel real. That one action is enough to make the audience understand who they're looking at and why they should care. In Rover's case, that moment already happened, and it happens much earlier than most people expect. Not in 3.3, not even in 3.1. It goes all the way back to when they first met Aemeath. She loses everything, she's just a child left with no one. That's the moment. There's no obligation forcing Rover to get involved, no clear expectation that this is something they need to do. Still, they choose to step in. They choose to save her, and more than that, they choose to stay. They become a presence in her life, in some way even a parent figure, at least for a time. That's not a mission, that's not the role of a savior, that's a decision. It's a small moment in the grand scale of the story, yet it completely changed how we see Rover. For the first time, their actions don't feel imposed on them, they feel personal. That's where the shift begins, and it doesn't stay that simple. Everything that follows, losing Aemeath, regaining those memories, facing that loss again in the present, that's not the start of the change, it's the continuation. More than that, it's the test. Once that initial choice is made, the story keeps pushing it further. It forces Rover to confront what that decision actually means, what it cost, what it feels like to lose someone they chose to care about. Then it brings them back to the same point again, not as a savior, but as someone who now understands what they're risking. That's what makes this different from a traditional save the cat moment. It doesn't just define the character once, it follows them, it evolves with them. By the time we reach 3.3, we're not just watching Rover try to save someone, we're watching them try to hold on to something that already changed them once before. That's where the emotional weight really starts to land. At that point, it's no longer about proving who they are, it's about showing how much they've changed. If that moment is where everything starts, then Aemeath is the reason it actually matters. Without her, that choice Rover makes doesn't carry the same weight. On its own, it's just an action, something that moves the story forward. With her, it becomes something personal. That's why losing her hits so differently. From the beginning, Aemeath isn't just another character in the story, she's the one thing that exists outside of Rover's role as a savior, the one connection that isn't built on power or responsibility. It's built on presence, on the simple fact that Rover chose to stay when they didn't have to. That's what makes everything that comes after so much heavier. When Rover loses her, it doesn't feel like a failure in the story, it feels real. At that point, we're not watching a protagonist fail a mission, we're watching someone lose a person they chose to care about. That difference changes how everything that follows is read. When Rover regains those memories, it doesn't feel like the story giving them new information, it feels like something coming back, something they already lived through, something they now have to face again. By the time the present conflict begins, that connection is already there. The story doesn't need to build it again, it was established, then taken away. So when Rover decides to save Aemeath again, it doesn't come from the same place it did before. This time, it's not just a choice, it's a response. A response to loss, to guilt, to everything they couldn't do the first time. That's where Aemeath becomes more than just the person being saved. She becomes the anchor for Rover's entire transformation. Everything about her reflects that change. The way she acts, the way she protects others, even her willingness to sacrifice herself. All of it comes back to the same idea. Caring about someone means being willing to lose something. That applies to both of them. That's why their relationship works so well. It's not just one person saving the other. It's two people shaped by the same choice, just in different ways. By the time we reach 3.3, that connection is already doing most of the work. The story doesn't need to force the emotion, it's already there. At that point, what we're watching isn't just a rescue, it's the continuation of something that started much earlier, something that already changed Rover once before. That's why what happens next feels so different from anything the story has done before. Up until this point, everything about Rover's journey feels like it's building towards one outcome. They make the choice, they carry the weight of it, and eventually, they go back to save Aemeath. Everything points in that direction. Rover saves her. On the surface, that's exactly what happens, but that's not really what makes this moment work. If it were just that, then this would be another story about a hero stepping in and fixing everything, and it doesn't feel like that. Something about it is different. At this point, Rover doesn't feel like the center of everything anymore. The story shifts its perspective, not by removing Rover from it, but by widening the frame and giving way to everything around them. All the people who are lost, all the ones who came before, all the ones who still choose to act even when they're gone. They're part of this moment too. When the coordinates come together, when everything aligns so Rover can reach Aemeath, that's where the story reveals what it's really doing. Suddenly, it's not just about one person saving someone else, it's about everything coming together to make that outcome possible. Rover was never truly alone, still, this is the first time it feels like everyone matters equally. They're no longer just the one being supported, they're part of something larger than themselves. That's what changes everything. Up until now, Rover has always been positioned as the solution, the one who steps in, the one who fixes things. Here that role shifts, not in a negative way, in a necessary one. The story stops treating Rover as someone above everything else and starts placing them within the world instead. They're still important, but they're no longer the point everything revolves around. That's where that final idea comes in. This wasn't a story about heroes saving the world, it was the world saving its heroes. That line isn't just a poetic ending, it defines what the story is trying to be. Rover still makes the choice, they still carry it all the way through. That part hasn't changed. What changes is what that choice means. On its own, it was never enough. It needs everything else. It needs the world. That's why the ending feels earned. Not because one character was strong enough to overcome everything, but because everything came together to make that moment possible. In that moment, Rover isn't just the one saving someone anymore. There's someone being supported, someone being helped, someone who, for the first time, doesn't have to carry everything on their own. That's what completes the change. Not just from savior to hero, but from a role to a person. That's what makes this moment so important. It's not just that Rover saves Aemeath, it's everything that had to happen for that moment to even be possible. The choice they made back then, the loss that followed, and everything that came after it, all of it leads here, to the point where everything finally starts to make sense. Because in the end, this isn't really a story about a savior doing what they were meant to do, it's about someone choosing to act and slowly becoming something more because of it. Not perfect, not all powerful, just human. And that's why the ending works. Not because one character was strong enough to carry everything on their own, but because everything around them made that moment possible. Because even the person meant to save everything still needs help. That's the moment Rover stops being just a role and finally becomes a person. And honestly, if this is the direction Wuthering Waves is heading in from here, there's a lot more to talk about.